On a bright Saturday in May of 1967, mechanic Stefan Michalak reported watching two glowing objects descend near Falcon Lake, Manitoba. By that afternoon, an ordinary day of prospecting had become one of the most thoroughly investigated UFO cases in Canadian history. Flip your pillow to the cold side and settle in. This is the High Strangeness Sleep Society. Highway 1 ran east and west through the southern edge of Whiteshell Provincial Park, joining Winnipeg to the Ontario border through a country of lakes, pines, and exposed rock. At about 3 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, May 20th, 1967, Constable G.A. Solotki was patrolling near the entrance to Falcon Beach when he noticed a man walking along the shoulder. The man wore light trousers, a brown jacket with no shirt beneath it, and a gray cap. He carried a brown briefcase. When the police car turned back toward him, he waved, then warned the constable not to come too close. Solotki's report places the claim on a public road in front of a named officer within hours of the event Michalak said had occurred. Stefan Michalak, a Winnipeg industrial mechanic and amateur prospector, reported that around noon on May 20th, 1967, he saw two glowing, rotating objects north of Falcon Beach in Manitoba's Whiteshell Provincial Park. In his account, one settled on a rock outcrop while the other departed, and heat damaged his clothing and burned his chest and abdomen after he approached. At about 3 that afternoon, RCMP Constable G.A. Solotki encountered him on the Trans-Canada Highway and recorded the essential claim. Outpatient treatment in Winnipeg followed that evening. Over the following months, the RCMP, Royal Canadian Air Force, Department of National Defense, health officials, and a University of Colorado research project examined his account, his clothing, and a place he later identified as the site. They documented injuries, inconsistencies, a moss-free semicircle, and a small radioactive smear. The cause of the original event remained undetermined. Solotki's account is short and practical. In it, Michalak described two glowing, rotating spaceships, contact with one object, and heat or exhaust that burned his shirt, chest, and cap. The constable saw damage on the cap and was shown marks on the torso, though the witness kept backing away whenever he tried to look closely. Solotki thought the marks resembled ash rubbed on the skin, recording what he observed at the roadside. The constable also wrote that Michalak looked like someone who had overindulged. His eyes were bloodshot, his manner was upset and confused, and some of his answers were incoherent. The same report records an absence of liquor odor. Solotki placed that sensory observation beside his broader impression of the man's condition. Solotki offered to drive him into Falcon Beach and arrange treatment. According to the officer, Michalak declined and said he was all right. Roughly half an hour later, Michalak came to the detachment office but remained outside and asked where he could find a doctor. He then waited for an evening bus back to Winnipeg. Months later, Michalak wrote that he had asked for medical aid and the constable declined. The same-day officer's record takes priority for the roadside exchange, with Michalak's later recollection preserved as a conflicting version. Back in Winnipeg that evening, Michalak's son took him to the emergency department at Misericordia Hospital. The RCMP later recorded that he was treated and released that evening. He told the intern that the injury had come from an aircraft exhaust because, he said, he feared disbelief if he gave the full account. The case began with a man on the shoulder of a public highway, a constable trying to decide what kind of help was needed, and a story already carrying both a physical mark and a reason for doubt. Falcon Lake lies about 150 kilometers east of Winnipeg, close to the Ontario border. It is part of Whiteshell Provincial Park, a broad lake district where the Canadian Shield appears at the surface in rounded gray outcrops. Between the rocks are stands of jack pine, low ground, creeks, and patches of moss and lichen. Manitoba's Park Service counts roughly 200 lakes across the Whiteshell. Highway 1 offers only a narrow crossing through a much larger country. The name Falcon Lake can make the incident sound as though it happened on an empty shoreline. The actual setting was more layered. Falcon Beach was a resort community with a motel, a golf course, park staff, roads, cottagers, and travelers moving along the Trans-Canada Highway. Firewatch facilities served the forest around it. Dense trees and uneven ground screened the place Michalak later identified about 2 miles north of the highway. A report from a busy holiday region carries different questions from a report made in a truly isolated place. Other people were in the wider area. Trees, ravines, rock ridges, and marshy pockets could keep one person out of view of another, even at modest distances. The landscape can explain some failures to see. The existence of the reported objects remains dependent on Michalak's testimony. May 20th fell on Canada's Victoria Day weekend. A bus from Winnipeg had brought Michalak to the Falcon Motel on Friday night. Early on Saturday, he went north into the park, carrying the simple tools of a rockhound: a hammer, map, compass, paper, pencil, goggles, and food. The morning passed with him looking, chipping at quartz, and following the exposed formations to see what they might contain. The Whiteshell was a natural place for that interest. Its visible bedrock invites attention. Quartz seams can run across an outcrop like pale lines under the surface, and the region had a history of mineral prospecting. Previous searches for deposits had given Michalak reason to keep a promising place private. When police later asked him to lead them back, he repeatedly worried that publicity would reveal his mineral claims. Secrecy around a claim can be read in two directions. Reluctance to publish the location had an ordinary explanation and also delayed investigators' access to the evidence. The stated aims combined a warning to others with protection of private mineral ground, leaving the motive ambiguous. 1967 also sat inside the public era of flying saucer reports and Cold War aerospace experiments. Canadian authorities had instructions for collecting unidentified object reports so that an uncertain observation could be compared, checked, and filed. Falcon Lake produced more paper than most because Michalak described an injury, damaged clothing, and a physical place that might be examined. The landscape shaped the investigation because a person following exposed rock through the bush could emerge somewhere unexpected. Search parties used his descriptions and scattered trail objects to reconstruct a partial route, with the central place still missing along it. Before there was a celebrated case, there was a Saturday outing in spring. The ordinary world around it was quartz, bus schedules, a motel room, a highway patrol, and a man expecting to spend the day with a hammer in his hand. In 1967, Stefan Michalak was an industrial mechanic employed by Inland Cement in Winnipeg. The RCMP checked with his workplace and described him as a good and trusted employee. Their background inquiries found no known history of serious mental disorder, and people who had dealt with him before the weekend had noticed no approaching disturbance. He had been born in Poland and came to Canada in 1949 after the war years in Europe. Later summaries sometimes turn him into an engineer or a welder. The contemporary police record describes an industrial mechanic family man, and amateur prospector. Those details return him to an ordinary life before the label of witness began to cover everything else. Mechanical experience influenced the way he described the reported object. To him, it was a machine, possibly American or Canadian, perhaps in trouble. In later interviews, his family and researchers recalled that he continued to favor a terrestrial or military possibility, an interpretation narrower than many retellings that followed. The first investigators met him at home on Tuesday, 3 days after the event. His wife and 19-year-old son were present. So was Barry Thompson, a member of the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, a civilian UFO group. Thompson's presence before the formal RCMP interview shows how quickly the case had moved beyond the family and local police. During a 2-hour interview, Corporal C.J. Davis and Constable Zacharias found Michalak physically uncomfortable and heard his reports of headache, nausea, inability to eat, and rapid weight loss. They documented a broad, blotchy burn across his chest and abdomen, roughly a foot in diameter, with unburned areas inside its perimeter and no blistering. This irregular injury was observed and treated in May. The neat grid of dots entered the record months later. Family Dr. R. Douglas Otway told police that Michalak appeared to have undergone a severe ordeal and arranged for the damaged cap, undershirt, and skin to be checked at the Winnipeg Cancer Research Clinic. Those first radioactivity tests were negative. The undershirt and cap showed heat damage. The civilian investigator Thompson had already taken a plastic-covered glove that Michalak said was damaged when he touched the object. One potentially useful item left official custody almost immediately. At the highway, Michalak asked that the story be kept quiet. 3 days later, a civilian investigator was at his home and newspapers were reporting it. He told officers he wanted others warned of possible danger while protecting his mineral ground. Warning others and protecting a mineral claim offered competing reasons to report the event while withholding its location. An ordinary morning of prospecting ended with Michalak returning distressed. Within hours, a police officer had met him, medical staff had treated him, and investigators had documented an injury with damaged clothing. The source of those conditions remains confined to his account. The full sequence comes from Michalak's interviews and from a short book he published later in 1967. Every version rests on the account of a single observer. The chronology he gave begins at about 5:30 in the morning when he left the motel and spent several hours moving through the bush. After a light meal, he returned to a quartz vein and resumed chipping at it. The sudden noise of geese drew his attention upward to 2 red glowing objects descending together. As they came lower, their shape seemed to change from cigar-like to oval or disc-like. In his developed account, one object stopped above the ground and remained for a few minutes before moving away. The other settled on the flat top of a rock outcrop about 160 feet from him. Solotki's much shorter roadside version said both objects had landed near him before the narrative acquired greater precision. In the description he gave, the object on the rock changed from red toward gray and then took on the appearance of heated stainless steel. Using the goggles he carried for stonework, he studied it, made a sketch, and later estimated it at roughly 40 feet across, with a raised section on top. The account included no visible wings, tail, insignia, seams, or landing gear. For much of the reported interval, Michalak described a still scene in which he watched the object remain on the rock. Warm air moved from its direction, he said, carrying a sulfur-like smell and a low mechanical sound, while an opening in the side filled with light too bright for him to see beyond it. After waiting, he moved closer and reported hearing sounds that resembled human voices. He called out in several languages and received no reply. The sounds then ceased as panels closed over the opening, leaving a surface he later described as seamless. Believing he had found an experimental vehicle whose occupants might need help, Michalak touched the exterior with his gloved hand and found the surface hot enough to damage it. According to his account, the object then turned until a panel or grill passed in front of him and released hot air across his upper body, damaging his clothing and burning his torso before the object rose and left. The contemporary medical record describes a broad, non-blistered burn treated on an outpatient basis. Its cause remained undetermined. Before leaving, he said, he inspected the place and gathered what he could carry. Headache and nausea made the walk difficult until he emerged about a mile from his presumed entry point and started east along the highway. That was when Constable Solotki saw him. Many later summaries repeat the sketch, voices, dimensions, and grill as though each came from a different record. The police transcripts, newspapers, booklet, and family retellings all traced to Michalak as the sole witness. Its central structure stayed recognizable through changes in descriptions, directions, and interactions. Investigators now needed the physical site. The trouble was finding it. The official investigation began with unusually tangible material, an injured witness, damaged clothing, a sketch, and a location said to be within walking distance of a major highway. That gave the RCMP and the Royal Canadian Air Force something more concrete than a light seen far away. It also gave them more opportunities for the evidence to become confused. The first search parties worked from Michalak's directions while he said he was too ill to go. An old saw and shopping bag allowed them to reconstruct part of his path. The reported landing place remained unfound. During a later search, investigators accompanied him into the bush, among them members of the University of Colorado UFO study that became known as the Condon Project. The outcrop again proved elusive. He attributed his disorientation to the dense, repetitive terrain, the changing spring landscape, and too many suggestions from other people. The investigators saw aimless searching where he described confusion. Both readings fit parts of what happened. On the weekend of June 24th and 25th, Michalak returned with a civilian named Gerald Hart and said they found the place after hours of looking. Their removal of outer shirt remnants, a steel measuring tape, soil, and moss created the case's central chain of custody problem, since officials had asked Michalak to leave any relocated evidence undisturbed until they could examine it. After finding the place with Hart, Michalak initially refused to reveal it until mineral claims were filed. The RCMP viewed that as inconsistent. Michalak treated the claim location as valuable. The paperwork preserves the conflict and the motive remains unsettled. The collected soil produced a high enough reading in an early laboratory check to concern the Federal Radiation Protection Division. That result brought Stuart Hunt from the Department of National Health and Welfare into the case. Hunt surveyed Michalak's home and confined the readings to bags holding soil and recovered material. The handling was poor. Items from different locations had been stored together, making later transfer of contamination possible. Concern about public safety finally brought the parties back into cooperation. On July 28, Michalak led a group of RCMP, RCAF, and health personnel to the place he identified. It lay about 2 miles north of the highway, inside an area searched earlier and surprisingly close to a rock where officers had rested during one failed attempt. Trees and a ravine had hidden the relevant surface from their position. The site was smaller and less open than the earlier description had suggested. On the rock, officials recorded a roughly 15-foot semicircle where moss had been removed. The report preserved brushing or raking as a possibility, with few visible signs to support it. The rock where Michalak said he had been prospecting lay about 200 feet away. Direction created another conflict between Michalak's earlier west-southwest compass bearing for the object's departure and an apparent opening through the trees that ran north-northeast. When questioned, he said he must have made a mistake, leaving a large error in a detail first presented as an exact reading. Hunt surveyed the area with radiation instruments. He confined the contamination to a small crack crossing the crown of the rock, with a little affected lichen and ground vegetation beside it. The total area was no larger than about 100 square inches. Hunt judged that there was no serious hazard to people crossing the site. The material was associated with radium, and investigators considered whether old luminous paint could account for it. Radium paint had once been used on watch and instrument dials. Questions remained about the exact identification and about how a small smear reached that particular crack. The timing and source of the contamination remained undetermined. The recorded radioactivity was a small, localized contamination, inside evidence that the witness and others had already handled. Its meaning remains uncertain. The RCMP's August report listed discrepancies: the disagreement over drinks at the motel, trouble locating the place, the changed departure direction, trust placed in Hart, and the removal of evidence. It also recorded unresolved matters: Michalak's illness, changes noted in his blood counts, the burns and clothing damage, and the semicircle on the rock. Both groups remained side by side in the report. By late summer, Falcon Lake had become several different files held by offices with different responsibilities. The RCMP documented the witness, searches, clothing, site, and inconsistencies. Military and health officials reviewed the aviation concern and radioactive material, and the University of Colorado team placed the case within its broader study of unidentified flying object reports. The RCMP's August summary preserved the investigation in its unfinished state. It listed the changed departure bearing, difficulty finding the site, removal of material before official inspection, and disagreement over Michalak's activities at the motel. The same document recorded his illness, observed burns, damaged clothing, and the semicircle on the rock as unresolved matters. The report closed with both groups still present. A Department of National Defense summary used careful administrative language. It said the investigation had been unable to provide evidence that would dispute Michalak's story. The sentence left the reported object unresolved and marked the limit reached by the Canadian inquiry. Stuart Hunt and the Radiation Protection Division had a narrower responsibility. Their work established the small contaminated area, its association with radium, and the low risk to anyone passing through the site. The timing and source of that material remained undetermined. Their findings addressed public safety and evidence handling, then returned the larger encounter to the other files. The University of Colorado study reached its own endpoint in Case 22. Its investigator emphasized the unsuccessful searches, changing site description, lack of a second witness, and uncertain provenance of the recovered samples. The project classified the available material as insufficient evidence for an unconventional craft. The original injury remained without an identified cause. Working within separate mandates, the police preserved testimony and physical observations. Defense officials recorded an unresolved report. Health officials measured a limited radiological concern, and the Colorado Project assessed the evidentiary value of the case. Together, their papers ended with an investigated report and an undetermined cause. By the time the formal inquiries slowed, Falcon Lake had already entered a different kind of record through a small booklet written by the witness himself. Before the end of 1967, Michalak published My Encounter with the UFO. Only a few months separated the incident from the booklet, placing it close to the events while allowing time for police interviews, newspaper coverage, searches, and the attention of civilian investigators to shape the setting in which it was written. The booklet gathered a story that had previously existed in shorter statements and official summaries. Its sequence began with the early walk from the motel, moved through the geese and the two descending forms, and lingered beside the object on the rock. The bright opening, voices, heated surface, burst of air, damaged clothing, and difficult return to the highway became parts of one continuous narrative. That continuity gave Falcon Lake a form people could remember. The same-day roadside report was brief and practical. In publication, the account supplied dimensions, dialogue, mechanical observations, and a fuller chronology. It also preserved Michalak's later recollection of asking Constable Solotki for medical help, where the officer's contemporary report recorded an offer that Michalak declined. Both versions entered the history of the case, though the longer account was easier to retell. As a first-person source, My Encounter with the UFO records the meaning its author gave the experience in 1967. He described the object as a manufactured vehicle and continued to favor the possibility of terrestrial or military technology. The encounter stayed centered on an unidentified machine, even as later retellings supplied their own interpretations. Once the narrative was in print, its scenes supplied a durable structure for newspaper features, television reconstructions, and later books. The geese rising over the rock, the open panel filled with light, and the burst of heat became the recognizable Falcon Lake sequence. Retellings could shorten it or strengthen individual details, yet they continued to follow the path laid down in the booklet. The family carried that published account into the next generation. 50 years after the incident, his son, Stan Michalak, and researcher Chris Rutkowski released When They Appeared, combining family history with a larger collection of case material. The experience had moved from a witness's small publication into a shared record of how the event affected a household and remained present across decades. In 2018, the Royal Canadian Mint placed the central scene on a silver collector coin. Its colored, light-activated design showed the object above Michalak as heat crossed the rock, turning the booklet's most vivid moment into an artifact of Canadian popular culture. The following year, the University of Manitoba announced the arrival of Rutkowski's extensive UFO files, including Falcon Lake materials and artifacts. Library and Archives Canada devoted a two-part program to the incident and the government papers in its collection. Readers could now place the polished first-person story beside reports written by police, defense officials, health investigators, and the Colorado study. Together, the official papers and My Encounter with the UFO preserved both the progress of the inquiry and the story Michalak wanted remembered. The legacy of Falcon Lake grew from the space between them. So we returned to Highway 1 in the middle of a May afternoon. A police cruiser slows near Falcon Beach. On the shoulder stands an industrial mechanic with a gray cap, a brown jacket, and a briefcase. He carries an unfamiliar account. The papers that followed preserved the damaged clothing, the first description of the burn, the officer's doubt, and his note that there was no smell of liquor. They also recorded the failed searches, mineral claims, changed bearing, semicircle on the rock, and small radioactive smear in the crack. Contemporary records establish that Stefan Michalak came out of the Whiteshell distressed and injured, reporting an encounter that officials took seriously enough to investigate. The cause of the injury, the identity of what he saw, and the origin of the later site evidence remain unresolved. The testimony survives, and its final explanation remains unknown. Beyond the old reports resting in their folders, the highway continues east through the trees, and the small place on the rock returns to moss, weather, and the changing seasons of the Whiteshell. The answer can remain where the file leaves it. There is nothing more you need to decide tonight. Good night. Sleep well.